Well, our first scripture reading today is from the Gospel according to St. Matthew. This passage is about prayer, and it's a part of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, which is a collection of his teachings that he undoubtedly gave in many places and different occasions. He undoubtedly gave sections of this whole larger section, what we call the Sermon on the Mount, in different places as well. But here we have it collected all in this one occasion when he spoke. And here he's talking about prayer. And he says, "And whenever you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and at the street corners, so that they may be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward. But whenever you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. When you are praying, don't heap up empty phrases as the Gentiles do, for they think that they'll be heard because of their many words. Don't be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask Him. Pray then in this way: Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also forgive our debtors. And do not bring us to the time of trial, but rescue us from the evil one." Well, our second reading today is different from the one printed in the bulletin. It's actually from the Old Testament book of 1 Kings, chapter 19. And this is a section where the prophet Elijah is being chased by King Ahab and Jezebel, or Jezebel as we pronounce her name, being chased around because he's spoken out against evil things that he's seen. So he seeks the Lord on a mountaintop. And this is what happens. We read beginning in verse 9, "Then the word of the Lord came to him, saying, 'What are you doing here, Elijah?' He answered, 'I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away.' He, God, said, 'Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by.' Now there was a great wind, so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave." May God add his blessing to the reading of his holy word.
First of all, thank you for letting me give my sermon today. If any of you guys fall asleep, I don't mind. If you throw anything, I get to keep it. You'll have to get it back after the sermon. I charge a slight rental fee. This story I've told several times, and it's like any good story. I add and subtract, change it, and right now I've changed a few parts of it to keep from having my wife hit me on top of the head with one of her shoes. So let me begin. Like I said, any good story has a beginning and an end to it. This one starts at a little church on the west side, right next to Ben Davis High School. The church sits on approximately 4 acres of land. I know, because the trustees used to complain about that every meeting we had. So, let us start off about mid-June 2004. Me and Bob Newby, a good friend of mine, had been coerced into teaching the teens during vacation Bible school. No teens showed up. So me and Bob sat in the teen room, happily drinking coffee and shooting the breeze. Our minister, Ted, showed up and he asked, "Where's the teens?" "We don't know." He said, "Well, why don't we pray for some teens to show up?" And we went, "Yeah, sure." And so he said a prayer. And afterwards, he said, "Last week I gave a sermon on the power of prayer. And I talked about that minister who ran a charity locally here, that every time he started to run out of money, he'd go into his office, pray, and miraculously, the next day, a check would show up to keep the ministry going and the charity going until the end of the month." Now, Bob, he was a small businessman, sort of snickered and rolled his eyes. Me, because I'm a smart aleck, looked at Ted and said, "I think what you had in this case was a very good staff who got on the phone and started hitting all the donors out there for money because they needed a cash flow problem and they needed some funds to see them through to the end of the month." And Ted just looked at me and did his usual disbeliever routine. And we sort of all forgot about it and started talking about the Colts, had a good time. Now let's move ahead to 2012. At our May meeting, one of the trustees by the name of Carl came up with what he thought would be a great money-making idea. He would go out and get a roller tiller and go way back in the back by the tree line and roller tiller a plot of 20 feet by 40 feet, get it all ready for planting, and then sell plots to church members at $10 a plot. Well, because of my position within the church, I felt I had to shell out $10 for a plot. And anyway, about mid-June, because me and Denise got busy doing other things and we hadn't got around to going out there to the plot, Denise decided she wanted to plant in the garden. Now let me backtrack a little bit, because Carl, in his ignorance to plow up that plot, forgot that the nearest spigot was about 350 feet away from where he'd tilled the land. And the nearest spigot also had the nozzle taken off of it. You couldn't turn the thing on. The trustees had taken it off to keep the local kids from Ben Davis or wherever from turning on the hose and running the water. And trustees, like the trustees are, they forgot where they put the handle. So anyway, the women and everybody who had bought a plot were going to have to do the bucket brigade from the front of the church all the way to the back to water their plants. I thought this was really slick. Anyway, about mid-June we had Friday night, we had a weenie roast for the kids and the teens. And Denise was coming over, and she said, listen, I'll stop by Rutgers and have them give me some plants so I can plant it in that plot of land. I said, whatever. Well, anyway, she comes tooling in, and she says, I got the plants in the back. Me and Mark, one of my audio-video teams, went to the car, looked in the trunk, and there was 10 of the scrawniest, sickest looking tomato plants and 10 of the scrawniest looking bell pepper plants you guys have never seen. These things look like they're one step to death. And I looked at her and she said, Rutgers told me these are good plants. He said, they may look bad, but these are good plants, and I believe in Rutgers, and he's a good Christian, and these are good plants. I said, whatever. So me and Mark grabbed the plants, went over to the plot, and Denise came trucking in with her little spade in her hand, and I said, okay, you plant them, I'm going to go back to a weenie roast. So Denise comes on in, sits on down. I put a hot dog on a stick so she can burn it and have something to eat. Everybody likes carbon. So I said, did you plant the plants? She said, yes, I planted the plants. And I said a prayer over each plant, praying to God that He protects these plants, nurtures these plants, and make sure they have a bountiful harvest. And I didn't say anything, but I was thinking, yeah, God has nothing better to do but to look over 10 scrawny tomato plants and 10 scrawny bell pepper plants. So anyway, Sunday, she wandered out to water the plants. I was looking at them, and lo and behold, they were still alive. I couldn't believe it. I thought they'd be flat on the ground, or something. Nah, they were happy little plants starting to grow. And I walked away. Well, now you got to remember, 2012, and you can look this up, this is the truth, was an extremely hot year for us. We had a record number of 90-degree days. And that Thursday started the trend of the 90-degree days. And Denise, when I got home, Denise was looking really ragged. And I said, what happened? She said, I just can't get the water out there to little plants. It's just too much for me, which is understandable. I said, well, don't worry about it. She said, but I said a prayer before I quit watering, and I asked God to watch over these plants and to continue to bless them and protect them from everything and to let them grow. I said, oh, okay. It's like, whatever. And the following Sunday, I walked out thinking, I'm going to see a bunch of dead plants out there, wilted. Nope. The plants had started to grow. They got up to about knee high. I couldn't believe it. I'm sitting there looking at a bunch of plants that should be dead, and they weren't. And I thought, well, the bugs are going to eat them. We got lots of bugs back there, little Japanese beetles, everything else. I figured they're going to be munching on those things. And I walked back and wandered into the kitchen where a friend of mine, Sue, was cleaning up a mess. And I looked at her and I said, "Hey, Sue, thank you for watering the plants in my plot." Now, she turned, looked at me like I had just grown a third eye. And she said, "I have enough problems getting my 2 deadbeat sons to help me haul the water out to my plot and the Boy Scout plot. I don't have time for yours." I said, "Well, somebody's been watering them." She said, "Yeah, I don't know who. I guess it must be that good Indiana clay. Got a lot of water in it." I thought, oh, okay. No major biggie. Well, in the middle of the week, we had your typical Indiana thunderstorm. You know, the type that comes in, lots of thunder, lots of lightning, heavy strong winds, torrential rains, hail, the whole 9 yards. It had knocked over my basketball net that I had stuck up in the parking lot, you know, the pole things. It had knocked that over, knocked over a couple trash cans out in the playground, and whatever. And I thought for sure it had destroyed some of my plants. Well, I walked out to the garden, looked down. Not a single plant had been hurt. Nothing. Matter of fact, what really got me was the bugs had not eaten on any of those plants. All the other plants, a lot of bug damage, but not those plants. I thought, this is getting Twilight Zone time. And I thought, well, the weeds are going to get him. Because right about then, the plants had started getting a lot of little flowers on them, and little tomatoes were starting to show up, and little bell peppers were starting to bloom out. And I was just looking at them, shaking my head. I said, well, if the weeds don't get them, the critters will get them. You know, we had a lot of demented squirrels, rabbits, possums, raccoons, you name it, we had it back in that area. So I walked away. Following Sunday, I walked out. Not a single weed had even came close to any of those plants. All the other plants in the plot garden were overgrown with weeds. Not that section, not a single weed. Not a single bug had eaten those plants. Not a single critter had munched on any of those tomatoes. And by now we're talking beef eater type tomatoes, you know, about this big. And bell peppers about this big. Huge. I'd never seen tomatoes that big and that many. Well, the following Sunday, they were starting to get ripe, I noticed, and I figured, okay, I'll harvest them that following Sunday. So I went and got my audio-video crew, 4 members of it, Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. That's their names. And I told Peter and Paul, that was their names, to man the camera and the sound system. And the 4 of us, or 5 of us, happily trucked out to the garden to pick those tomatoes. Now on the way out, I noticed Bill, one of our next door neighbors, was on his rider mower, having himself a good time cutting the grass and making a lot of noise. And one of the next door neighbor's dogs, way over in the far corner, had found himself a squirrel in a tree and was going nutty, just barking his head off. And the kid that lived behind the trees had decided it was a good place to set up his CD and start playing Black Sabbath at full blast. It was a sound festival. Well, anyway, we're out there picking the tomatoes, the ripe ones, and we filled up 3 baskets, laundry baskets full of ripe tomatoes, and 1 basket full of ripe bell peppers, the big ones. And we still had bell peppers and tomatoes on those plants. Couldn't believe it. Even the ones that had touched the ground showed no signs of rot or bug. Nothing. And I'm sitting there. I told those guys, you get on back before they miss you. And I get in trouble with Ted about yanking you away from one of his sermons. I said, you guys head on back. And so they're headed on back, carrying their baskets of tomatoes. And I'm sitting there looking at these tomato plants and thinking, what's going on here? And right about then, that Bible verse that was read here about the thunder and God wasn't there, the earthquake and God wasn't there, the fire that God wasn't there. And the verse I was using talked about a gentle breeze that had come out of nowhere. And right as I thought about that, the lawnmower stopped. The dog stopped barking. The CD player stopped playing. It was quiet, still. And out of nowhere, the slight, gentle breeze started blowing. And up in the tree, the leaves started rustling. And they were, I swear, were making the sounds of a bunch of little kids giggling in that shh, shh type sound, right? Then I started getting goosey. Now, this is really weird. And right about then, the breeze stopped. Bill's lawnmower started up again, man, just blowing away. The dog found himself another squirrel to bark at and was just going to town again. The kid across from the tree line had put on Aerosmith and was blurring it away. And me, I looked at my crew, who were now about, 10 feet away. I yelled at them, "Wait up, guys, I'm coming after you." And I hurriedly walked. I didn't run. I hurriedly walked to where they were at and hustled them back into the church. My wife wanted me to add this in before I end this little sermon about me and my tomato plant. I had planted a tomato plant, and I are an excellent grower of tomato plants. I planted it. It grew all over the place. I had 3 trellises filled with that plant, and it was growing along the fence. People would be coming over looking at that tomato plant. A couple of people even thought it was a tree. It was so big. My daughter from California came out and said, "Is that a tomato plant, Dad?" And I said, "Yeah." My niece couldn't believe the size of that tomato plant. And I got 1 little tomato off of that plant. That was it. Just 1 tomato. Now, you can take a lot of things away from this. 1, thou shalt not mock a servant of the Lord when he's talking about God's work. 2, God works in a time frame that's far different from ours. 3, and I think is important, do not ever underestimate the power of a sincere prayer. God does watch after everything. And 4, and to me most important, that God has one mean sense of humor. Always remember that. God does have a sense of humor. He knows how to do a joke and you can laugh. And so I'll end it here. You all have a nice day out there. And if you're farmers or growers of veggies, have a nice time doing it. And I thank you for listening.